comment l'open data se conjugue au présent et au futur. C'est ce que nous allons voir avec nos prochains intervenants qui viennent du monde entier et que j'invite à me rejoindre sur scène. Yann Mareschal, chef de projet innovation à Bordeaux Métropole. Vous pouvez les applaudir. Ali González García, Director of Open Government pour la ville de Mexico au Mexique. Nous avons également Söderlind, chef de projet pour la ville d'Umeå en Suède, et Steve Scott, Solution Architecture Manager pour la ville de Leicester au Royaume-Uni. Et je vais laisser le soin à Arturo Rivera, Digital Government and Open Data Policy Analyst à l'OCDE, d'animer et modérer cette table ronde. Cette table ronde qui va se dérouler en anglais. Vous pouvez donc à nouveau utiliser vos écouteurs et bénéficier d'une traduction simultanée en français. Voilà, je vous distribue les micros pour pouvoir intervenir lors de cette table ronde. Et un micro, your microphone, Arturo.
Oh, merci. Voilà. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arturo Rivera. I am a policy analyst at the OECD. I work on digital government and open data policies, and I also contribute, to the work on a data-driven public sector, covering and addressing, for instance, challenges related to data governance, data ethics, and so on. Just a really quick disclaimer: I am not here by myself. I am also with other members of the OECD team. So please also feel free to reach and speak to them during the coffee breaks. I really look forward to have a really dynamic discussion with all the panelists. And before actually jumping into the discussion, I would like to quickly introduce yourselves. So here we have Yann Mareschal, from Bordeaux Métropole. We have Maria Söderlind. I apologize if I not pronounce your last name properly. From Umeå City, we have Alejandra González from Mexico City, and we also have Steve Scott from Leicester City Council. Before jumping and starting on in the conversation, there are three things that I would like to address from the OECD perspective. The first one is related to the challenges that we are seeing right now in terms of open data. We are seeing how actually policy priorities are changing, and this is something that I think it would be important to discuss as part of the panel. We have seen as well that OECD member and partner countries are entering in a consolidation stage. So now there is a real need to actually measure, the real impact that open data initiatives and policies are creating. For instance, in terms of better public services, in terms, of course, of transparency and so on. And last but not least, I would like to underline something. We need to understand that open data does not happen in isolation. And we need to be clear that right now we are living in a political and international environment where actually data governance is really important from a perspective of data ethics, from transparency in how actually data is being used, for instance, by countries. And this links also, to how open data can be used, by the public sector. That said, because this is not for me to speak, but I think just wanted to share these really quick thoughts with you. I would like to first start with a really easy question. And my question is, why? Why did you decide in your cities to actually work on open data? What value will you aiming to actually create, and which was the trigger? I know that some of you, for instance, were making democracy and public service delivery and design a priority, but I would like to hear from you and also the audience, why it's the reason that you engage on open data. I don't know, Yann, you're next to me, so maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, well, thank you. You hear me? Yeah. Hello, everybody. So it's not an easy question. Indeed. It's a tricky one because the reason why we decided to open data is different if you ask a politician or if you ask an operational one or if you ask the producer of data. So in Bordeaux, we were one of the pioneers in France to launch our first open data portal in 2011. In the wave of the interministerial mission EtaLab, which has in 2010, I guess, launched the first governmental portal, opendata.gouv.fr. So, well, there were 3 portals in the same territory at this time, because publishing data was a way to express the main missions of the local authority. And even if we always say that it's the transparency that drives local authorities or national authorities to publish data, I'm not so sure that of that. That was the argument, the main argument. I wish to be as transparent, to drive as transparency projects as the local authority which I'm in competition with. But the fact that in France, we are, looking for the reuses of the data and the business, the services that can be developed thanks to the data. So, well, that was maybe a policy of transparency that drives the intention, the first one, but what make the project go well was what kind of services we will be able to provide to our inhabitants thanks to the data.
So from the very beginning, actually, you were clear about the purpose of making data public. The purpose was to actually improve public services.
Yeah, well, to be honest,
but this happened more organically, like because sometimes, for instance, I mean, it can happen that the goals are not clear. So you just engage in the publication of data. But do you think that this happened at the very beginning, or this was organically?
We were asking to publish data because there was, mainstream of the government of the United Kingdom and the United States for providing data. So some three metropolis like Rennes, like Toulouse, like Nantes, decided to publish data, and our politicians well, Yann, what's happening? Where are our own open data portal? For the first, that was competition, and they thought that okay, that will provide more transparency. But in the fact, when we decided to build the first portal, of course we have to ask for data and when we ask for data, ouch. Not sure I want to share this data because it's Yann, it's strategic. So where is the transparency here? There is no. So that's the reason why it's a tricky question. Yes, I should, as the public agent, tell you. Yes, of course, I had I was asked as a public agent to provide transparency for my local authority. And so, well, you will have paid to come here and to hear some bullshit because it's the argument. But in real time, I had to prove all the collaborators that they will benefit, not for themselves, not only for themselves, but to provide services. And that's not the transparency that led, in the end of the story, the commitments of the business, the departments, but providing services for. I'm not sure I'm clear, but
yeah, you are. And if you're not, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions from the audience. I would like to hear from the other speakers. I don't know who would like to jump in. For instance, Alejandra, please tell us your story.
So. I think we as a government have a very strong conviction on using data as a driver for public innovation, okay? Like Yann said, sometimes there's a lot of data that when you put it out in the open, it makes the government probably, it makes the government maybe look bad because we're not doing the job excellent. But I think for us, it has been a driver of innovation because we have put out their data sets that we know the public will be very critical about. But as a government, it's actually very tough to work in government because especially in Mexico City, because the government, it's a big machinery And just to make any sort of innovation or improvement, you have to move a lot of pieces, a lot of people, there's a lot of legal stuff involved. So when we publish a data set that it may not look very beneficial to the government, the public becomes very critical of what we do, and then we start driving change. So in our case, it has been very important in terms, for example, of security. Okay, so we published the data set for the first time in Mexico, I think in the whole Mexican country, of crimes, geolocalized crime, and by type of crime. And we knew it was going to be very criticized because it looked like crime had gone up 500%. Okay, and if you know anything about public policy, you know that is not possible unless it's very evident on the streets. Okay, so we knew there was something wrong with that data. So we published the data and we took the political blow, but in the meantime we started reviewing all of the cases that were opened, all of the crime cases, right? And we noticed there was a trend. Like some of the crimes were reported as violent, were reported as non-violent, but if you looked at the description of the crime, those were actually violent crimes. So from the government part, there was, let's say, a misclassification that was intentional. So publishing that data was a driver for us to make not only the data better, but the public policy on security better.
I will make a question that you don't have to respond right now, and my question is how actually you think that the publication and the sharing and the reuse of this data had an impact on public trust in the government in Mexico City. So don't hold your answer. I think we can discuss about this afterwards. I don't know, Steve, Maria, if you would like to add something to this question.
Well, I can say that Umeå has launched a open data portal twice. The first time was back in 2014, and the driver that time was the IT department in the municipality, and that said, yes, of course we need to have open data, everyone has to have that one. And it failed because in 2017 that was kind of halted, and it just stood there collecting dust, no data was updated. And then now in 2019 we are part of a EU project, Ruggedized, and one of the deliveries for Umeå are a smart city open data decision platform. And using that project we have launched a new portal, and now it's because we want to have a decision platform built on open data that are the driver for the new portal.
Thank you. I think really quickly, Steve, I think something that is really important from the experience of Umeå City is about sharing failure and about sharing learning also from failure. I mean, sometimes, you know, I mean, we are in this kind of events sharing what has gone well or what has worked, but sometimes we fail to acknowledge actually that we can also learn from each other, actually, from these failure practices. Please, Steve.
So the main reason that we launched our data portal originally, I think this was back in 2014, was around transparency. So this is really publishing data on finances, on payments to contracts, and councillor expenses. Councillors are our politicians in England. So that was the main driver. And I think finding business cases to publish other data sets. So I'm really interested to learn from this conference and from other colleagues here on data sets that we can publish and actually will give a business benefit both to the council but also back to the community, because I think that's the key thing. So yeah, we're really looking for useful data sets to publish to expand it beyond our financial data sets that we publish at the moment.
Yeah. And if I may add, and focus on the reuse of the data sets. No, I mean the fact that you're just starting like to develop an open data policy actually is an opportunity, if you ask me. What about measurement? How do you measure the impact? If the first question was a difficult one, I think the second question is even more difficult, because impact, you know, can be measured or can be understood from different perspectives. You know, how do you measure the publication of data on public trust, on good governance, you know, on the fight against corruption in the country and so on? How do you measure, and what do you measure? And if you don't do it, what do you think that should be measured beyond the publication of data sets? I don't know who would like to start with this question.
Okay, so quantitative measurement, I think it's very easy. It's just number of datasets viewed, number of datasets downloaded, okay? But there's more important, like how do we measure the impact, okay? So I think more qualitative measurements could be how is the data reused, okay? A lot of what we publish is then used by journalists, by researchers, and sometimes by companies, okay? And a lot of, for example, the datasets for crime, the other datasets that we have, we do a lot of tracking on Twitter, we look at what is published in the news every time we publish a dataset, and we can have a view of public perception of the government. So far it has been very positive. I think on your question, I think people would rather have an open government that it may have its failures, but at least they see the failures and they see that we are working on them, versus having a government that pretends to be good, but it does not publish anything.
Thank you, Alejandra. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that question.
I can go, yeah. Our new portal has just been launched for about a month ago, so we don't measure so much on it, but one of the data sets we are publishing is energy consumption in different parts of the city. And we have high hopes for that because we are hoping to launch more data sets that in combination that we can see, okay, if we target that kind of people, maybe we can lower their energy consumption. Also, if we have different campaign in different parts, we can see, did it take effect? And one of the reasons we're going to have a decision platform, both for the politicians but also for the citizens, to see, can we understand why they made this decision? And right now there are budget cuts in Umeå, and they have decided to just said in the newspaper the next summer, there are 3 public pools, outdoor pools, that they will not open next summer because to save money. And just out of curiosity, I went in and checked the energy consumption in these areas, and I could say exactly which day they opened the pool and which day they closed the pool, because it was very evident when you looked in the data set of energy consumption, because in June the energy consumption should drop because people don't heat their homes anymore, but then it dropped and then it went up, and then it dropped again because then when they closed the pool. So, and also one of the things, one of the data sets we publish is a data set that people several times a week contacted the municipality and said, we want to have this data. And the owner of the data set said, please, can we put it on the portal instead? So now he and his people can save time to do other work and then instead say, please look at the portal. It's there for you to see.
Steve, I think you wanted to add something.
Well, that's one of the reuses that we have now, is because in England we have this thing of freedom of information, so people can submit freedom of information requests to the council to ask for public information. So we analyse those, and questions that we get repeatedly, we can publish those as a data set on the open data site, and that saves the staff time from having to respond to these requests, because they can just point them at the open data site. In fact, we have a thing on the place where people request them to say, you know, please look on the open data site before you submit a freedom of information request, because that saves a lot of time, and that's where a lot of our transparency information gets reused there.
Can I make a question to all of you? Because actually I think sometimes, as I was mentioning at the very beginning, you know, I mean, the focus on open data policies is on external users. And we don't really think about the users within the public sector. So my question for you is not how to measure that, because I mean we know that it's quite difficult. But as part of your open data policies and initiatives, how are you connecting this? How are you closing the golden data cycle? You know, which relates not only to the publication of the data, but to actually make sure that public officials within the public sector also use that data. And if you have done it, please share a use case, you know, where you have done this.
Yeah, well, the fact is that in Bordeaux, and sure it's the same case in other territories, we are the first customers of our own data. the mobile application, the chatbot, the websites, many services that we provide for the inhabitants. They ask the open data database. That's a way, to be sure that different channels of information give the same information. So that's the same. That when you have, several local authorities in the same territory, they have to provide different information. Let's talk about the transport. But I use the open data sets from the region, from the department, and they use my Metropolis database. The other part is we founded a national association in France, which is called Open Data France. And there is a large community of local authorities, and of course national one and international ones. So that's a way to be sure that we share all informations about our initiatives, that we build databases on the same pattern for all the database in the same kind of data set, and that's a way to be to provide more good database to be reused.
I think something that it's important to share that maybe some of you already know is that actually the case of France is really interesting because actually open data started at the local level, and then that triggered action at the central level of government. So thanks a lot for having shared this. And also I think it's really important, just connected to what you just said, the importance of communities. Open data, it's about communities, and it's about engaging them in the process. I don't know who else would like to add something to the question.
So I think it's quite correct that we have to be our own customers of the data. I think every single city needs to see data inside of its own government as common infrastructure. So what happened in Mexico City before on the law is that every single ministry had its own IT department, and they had their own data servers and their own application servers and whatnot. So starting this year with the agency I work with, which is a governmental agency, the law has stated that it's a single agency that takes care of the data and the IT infrastructure. And this has been very innovative because it has forced all of the data that was dispersed among all of the ministries to start to be centralized in a single point. And we're starting to think of data as interlinked between ministries. So obviously all ministries should share common data like boroughs or water, or simply a register for citizens, the services they access to, the social programs they have access to. All of that used to be like separate, and we're working on connecting everything, and that is so important to have an efficient government.
Something, if I may add, something that is happening that I think is really interesting right now at the central level is that countries are starting to realize that open data, as I was mentioning at the very beginning, doesn't happen in isolation. For instance, not only in terms of data governance, but actually they are moving towards broader national data strategies. And this is really important. I mean, we also need to acknowledge, that within the public sector, we cannot think about making and going open, in terms of data, and not thinking about, for instance, getting things right within the public sector. In the US, some time ago, actually that's what happened. The OMB and the White House were working actually on publishing open data, and after some time they realized that actually before continuing publishing this data, we need to clean the house. And a similar thing also happened in Argentina. So this, I think, also speaks about integration, and cohesion within the public sector, and also integration, with external users. Alejandra, you just mentioned something really important which touches on the importance of governance. For instance, how new legal instruments can actually move forward open data policy. We have, for instance, the example of La Loi Numérique. here in France. We were also discussing about other examples, for instance, the new open data law in the United States, and some other examples, across different countries. But I think there is also, a new legislation also means challenges in terms of implementation, and also in terms of how actually the government can enforce that implementation. You can speak about how do you use funding, how do you use other kind of policy levers to actually make open data happen. So what are the key challenges that you have faced so far, in your city, and how do you think that this had an impact on the maturity and the sustainability of open data, for instance, across different political administration? Because at the end, as I said at the very beginning, open data is not isolated. There is also politicians and policies and changing policy priorities. So I don't know, Steve, you would like to start with this?
Well, it's sort of related to that. We have a lot of IT contracts for our major systems. And a lot of those produced data, but then the data was, the company had the intellectual property right to the data, so we couldn't publish it. So we've changed our rules now to make sure that all systems that are advertised for the council for procurement, that we own the intellectual property and that we're going to publish non-sensitive, non-personal data as open data sets. So, that's going to make a big change for the way that we can publish information, things like air pollution and that kind of thing.
Can you further develop a little bit more in this point? Because I think going back to the data governance point, it's really important to make sure actually that you balance openness by default with the protection of sensitive data. And I don't know what you guys have seen, in your respective cities, but sometimes that cultural change and actually making clear that open data is not about publishing sensitive data is key. So could you further develop a little bit on this point?
Well, it's certainly something that we are very careful about because we make sure we don't publish anything. We have an information governance team who check things, so they're part of the publishing process. And we also check data as well. That we call it a mosaic effect, which means that you can put 2 or 3 data sets together and then find somebody. So we make sure that one data set might not be confidential, another one might not be, but put the 2 together, it could display something. So we're very careful about that as well. Say something like we're giving people benefits or that kind of information.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know, Yann, if you have something to say about this. Challenges.
So we have the same challenges to protect the privacy of the inhabitants, but in the other side, the law obliges to publish data. So I used this leverage to be sure that when we decided to build a new portal and an open data soft one, I will have many more data. So I went to the departments. That's the law. You can avoid, no excuse, because the law obliges to publish data. And maybe it's a good thing because there is many costs to organize the database on the sole purpose to be reusable for the third parts, because we are collecting data just for accomplishing our public missions, not on the purpose to be reused intentionally. So there is many works to do, and not from the IT department. It's quite easy, but when you are in a field department, the police department, the financials, they are used to manipulate databases. But in the gardens department, they are not used to manipulate databases, and we ask them, okay, so from now you will have to collect your data in this specific way, and you will have to publish it in this specific model. Okay, I understand that it's not the model you use for your own missions, but sorry, the law obliges to publish data, so other people. And of course they answer, well, okay, so who cares about the height of this tree? Well, many people cares. We don't know, but the fact that we shouldn't have to tell which kind of data would be reused the most, that's just the law, and you have to organize your database from now in this way. So of course, that's a good point that we have the force of the law to impose the open data. But since there is no sanctions, legal sanctions, so if I don't publish data, well, nobody is going to kill me. So since they know that now, I say it again, I should explain them, okay, the high of the tree, maybe it will be important to cross this data with another and with private. So thank you very much to share your data in the private sector. Very, very thank you. And maybe sometimes we will have some mobile applications, some service, some good information, some analysis, some public journalist information that will be really, really important. And we should not decide before sharing the data what will be the purpose to reuse them. Okay. So long work.
What do you think, Maria, about this? And also, if I may add other challenges, you made reference, to the challenges that you faced across the different stages, of open data back at the time, how you spoke about failure, and then this new open data project that you have and that you're leading right now. So not only related, to the usefulness of regulation, but also, for instance, in terms of ownership of within the project, also in terms of leadership, and also in terms of capacity. What do you have to say? What's your experience?
If I start with the main challenge, I think this time the challenge for us will be to ensure that the portal stays live, that people feel ownership of the data, because what's happened back in 2014 was that people at the IT department said, yes, we need open data, and you have some open data, don't you? And you have something also, don't you? And they published data, and then it came in 2017. It was the point when the portal to stay alive needed some kind of technical update, and no one wanted to pay the bill. So it's just froze in the state it was, with the data set that was there. And apparently everyone didn't understand that happened. So some kept publishing data, but the door was closed, and they never checked, is it up there? So back in January when I started, I contacted the old stakeholders and said, we are closing, we're putting down this old portal, launching a new one, you want to put data on that one too? And then one got back to me and said, wait a minute, what do you mean that you are closing the old portal? You can't do that. And I said, why? And one of the data set was published that in the city center, we measure the air quality. And that data was published every 50 minutes on the portal. And when you enter Umeå by car, you can come 2 main roads, and on these roads there's big electrical billboards. For instance, like I say, road work ahead, only one lane is open. But also it was supposed to say, stop, the air quality is really bad in Umeå right now, take a detour if you can. So the one who published, the stakeholders who published the air quality, told me that you can't take that one down because it feeds these traffic signs. And I said, well, no worries. If the signs are functioning today, there are no worries because the data set hasn't been updated in 2 years. And they said, fine. And the next day they got back to me and said, the traffic signs aren't working. So for 2 years, they thought that this information was published and people came. But in reality, it wasn't. And if they had just bothered to check once a year, it had only been for 1 year, but now it was 2 years before it was discovered. So this time we really had to make sure that people feel ownership of the data sets and of the portal.
Which is, I think, really important. From the very beginning, we need to be clear about the importance of engaging the final user in the design and development, and also the implementation and the measurement of the open data policy. Sometimes what we have seen at the OECD is that this engagement happens in latter stages. It's not something that is understood from the very beginning as something that should be done. And often we only think about users, as that, only mere users of the data, and not actually members, and stakeholders that can provide with knowledge to actually inform the development of the open data policy. I think we need to wrap up in a few minutes. So I would like to speak a little bit more about the future. What is coming, for you in terms of open data? What it's, and also link it, to actually the discussion that we were having related to challenges. Are you planning to develop new services? What is the importance of portals? Understanding that portals go beyond mere data catalogs. Open data portals are platforms for collaboration with the users. France is doing quite well actually in understanding that. They created a portal for open data, not an open government portal, open government data portal. And also any plans for the future in terms of developing, or contributing, to the development of smart cities and so on. Steve, please go ahead.
So we're looking at two areas. We've got a lot of ideas from Open Data Soft, so thank you for that. So we've got a team of business analysts now looking to see how we can use those in Leicester, and if they apply to Leicester, and if they do, then they're going to become projects to make that. The other side of things that we're doing is using open data for personalization on our main websites and apps that we use. So that we'll publish data to the open data portal and then pull it using APIs. So when somebody logs into our website, we'll be able to show them the information near them, so planning applications, who their council is, bin collections, issues on the street, that kind of thing. So that is sort of, we're going to turn it around and give it back to people, and then, they'll find that useful. And it's kind of an incentive then for them to log into our website.
Can I make a question? In these plans, because here, we benefit from the presence of representatives also from the private sector. How are you planning, or how do you foresee engaging potentially the private sector in this kind of initiatives?
Well, we have a startup forum, so we've got a new smart cities team, and they're working with the local tech startups to find out what data sets that they want us to publish that they will find useful, and they'll be able to use to make business opportunities for themselves. So for us, that's quite a useful way forward. So, because I think for us, the business case isn't in the council to publish data, the business case is outside of the council. So we're consulting with people to find out what they want from us that we can publish that will then benefit the city and the country as a whole.
Thank you, Steve. Before continuing and closing and wrapping up, I would like to, if you have any questions, please start to raise your hand and to hold the mic so that we can jump strictly, directly, to the Q&A after the discussion. Alejandra, I see that you want to say something. Do you want to say something?
Maybe on one of the questions is, we have on our side the law to our advantage, but that doesn't mean that other government bodies are going to give us the data that we want. So our strategy has been to sell them a benefit. So of course, in what they do, they come across a lot of problems that can be solved through data and technology. So what we do is, because we're capable of, we just go to them and ask them, what problems do you have? And that's a great conversation starter. Of course, they want to solve their problems, so we offer them a solution, and we introduce the topic of open data in there. And now the data is automatized because it comes from an information technology system, and that way we can also automatize the publishing of open data. So I think that's very important too.
Yeah.
Sorry, please.
That's a point, a very important point. The automation of collecting the data from the collect to the publishing is one of the main points to be sure to have a proper open data, reusable, and everybody looking in the same direction. What's important for us is that open data is just one block in a main strategy to the valorization of the data, and we hire new skills like data engineers, data scientists in the local authorities. I know that Lyon, the city of Lyon, did that also. So we can understand, analyze the data, we can share it, but we can collect it also. And it's just one step. Open data is just one step in the future to understand the big data. Indeed, in fact. So we organized our IT department and focused on how can we use all the data, the open ones, but the private one and the collaborations one, the citizens one, to make smart city real. One of the main challenges in the other side is the fight against the main the GAFAs and the main reusers. There is two parts in France. Local authorities who thinks that we should share data even with these huge companies, and the other that want to close our database, our open data, to this company. Google, of course, is the one spotted, and there is some action in national actions to prevent ourselves to share too many data with this kind of companies. Not from Bordeaux, but as Yann, I think that's a mistake because, well, we just have to share our data, and that's good if anybody can use it. But as a representative of Bordeaux Métropole, I can understand that we are concerned from what will be used by our data from this kind of huge company. So that's, well, maybe you have answers yourselves.
I think we all have more follow-up questions, but I'm afraid we need to close really quickly. So if you agree, and also, I mean, there is a coffee break afterwards. I don't know, please, the gentleman, if you have a question.
Yes, I just actually want to follow up the final point that Steve mentioned about, leveraging the startups to kind of help the government to make the decision to kind of publish the right database. So I'm in venture capital, so I'm really interested to kind of ask, people from different cities, is there any use cases that some startup successfully leveraged the database you published, and then you really made a business case from it? Any cases that you saw so far?
We haven't got any yet. That's the thing. So that's what we're looking for now, and I'm sure there will be, because there's a momentum there now that's building. So that's the main thing at the moment. Not yet, but there will be.
So in Mexico City, before we entered, there wasn't a map of the bus routes. And mobility is a very, very big issue in Mexico City because it's so big. So there are new companies that are innovating in mobility, like some sectors of the city that have very, very heavy traffic, have used our mobility datasets, which are some of them, I mean, there are more, but the bus routes map, which was manually drawn from what we had on paper this December, was used by mobility companies to have literally new ways of moving through the city, and we're proud of that.
Yes, mainly the public services for the inhabitants are on the transport, because we have a lot of problems of traffic in Bordeaux also. We have some services like how to handle the waste management. So inhabitants can ask questions, and the bot directly answer when will our trash will be collected, where can I put this kind of trash, and all of this called open data database. And we also have an application using open data. It's a connected can for blind people, which can call for all point of interest all around the blind person which is walking on the street. So not so much people concerned, but very, very important to be their life more comfortable on the streets of Bordeaux. That's some examples.
Thank you. Any other question? Please, the gentleman.
Just a quick question. If starting from the data collection, now you're able to benchmark some of your performance in key areas against other cities, and also learn from best practices or bad practices, and adjust the policies accordingly. Any example?
I think we should start sharing that data between us, because in my mind I think we haven't really done that, but I think it would be very, very difficult to compare a city so big as Mexico City to smaller cities. Like, obviously the numbers will not be equivalent, but I would be very interested to find common benchmarks. I don't know what you guys think.
One of the bad practice is to think about the customers of the data before thinking about internal organization. I made the mistake for Bordeaux. I think that if I can pick the general public with me, that would be easier to convince departments to share data. But that was not a success, because I should have before went to all departments of the local authority and make them understand what's happening with the sharing of the data, and it would be easier than they think. So the second step, and we launched our new portal on September. I did things differently, and I spent so many time to one-to-one or one service to one service, but with gaming, a lot of game around the data sharing, serious game of course, and that was better.
Thank you, Yann. I think we have 5 more minutes for one last question. Is there anyone in the public, because I barely see from here, with any other question you would like to raise? Okay, because I have. So you're speaking a lot about sharing data and how we need to share the data, for instance, between cities, also the sharing the data with the private sector and so on. What is the responsibility of the private sector to actually also share key data taxonomies to actually help and inform the development of public policy by the government? Because I think there is something really important, which is a matter of co-responsibility. It's not only about publishing the data for the public sector, for the private sector to use it, but also to reuse data produced, for instance, by civil society organizations, and also, for instance, by private sector companies. So what do you think about that? I mean, what is the responsibility also of the private sector?
Well, it's interesting hearing about the stories of public transport, because the public transport in England, and certainly in Leicester, is all private. So the different bus companies that come into the city have their own routes and their own data about where the buses are. And we've worked with them a lot about publishing that information so that you can actually see in real time where the buses are. So it's that kind of thing, I think, that would be useful, so that we can do things like you're doing in Mexico, rather than it being sort of, each company will publish it, but only on their own website. We can't aggregate it across the whole city.
We have a very interesting use case. There are new tech startups, mobility tech startups coming to Mexico City. Obviously, since they are private companies, they just get there and there is no regulation for that, right? And they are making use of public infrastructure, and they are offering a service to the public. And basically, if we do not regulate it, we end up with, that's a common problem in cities. I think there's a bunch of bicycles in the floor and whatnot. So we had a very nice use case where we asked scooter companies to share us their usage data so we can do policy analysis, and then we did an open contracting process for to put some order through it, because there were too many companies. And at the end, the 2 winners were decided via a Python script. So that's very nice, because there's no corruption in a Python script. You can just run it and it will throw the result. So that's the kind of policy that we want to do, where things are more automated and more open, and we take a little bit of, we take space for corruption outside of the government.
You want to say?
Yeah, well, we try to have a collaboration with the Waze, with the data of Waze, because in Bordeaux there is one of the most users of this application, to help you drive in the city. And it's really impressive is that when a driver is used to be by Waze. We have, how do you say in English? You know, you can't go sens interdit.
Prohibited. One way?
One way, thank you. One-way road, and but Waze didn't know because our database was not updated. And but everybody drive in this one-way road, and in the end of the story, we decided to put this road we correct two ways. We had to correct because of the habits of the people. So sharing data is really important, also with private companies, because in the end of the story, the users, the inhabitants, the private sector, they use data they has, and they can access. So if you do not let them access to the data, they will use wrong one or a non-proper one.
Thank you very much, Yann. I am afraid we need to wrap up and to finalize the session. Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I would like to encourage the participants to reach to the panelists and to discuss with them in the case that you have any more questions. And really quick, before I still have 30 seconds, we shared also some publications of the OECD outside the room. So please feel free to reach the team or to reach myself to discuss about the work that we do on open data at the OECD. And well, we will be happy to keep the discussion going. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Ciao.